So for me, one of the fundamental things is that no young person should be allowed to leave school or people referrally without being able to read and write at a time when we're talking about artificial intelligence, robotics. We have 40% unemployment of young people, black youngsters in London, unemployed, under 25. If you can't read and write, you cannot be competitive in that environment. Now, young people have been really key to a lot of the work that we've done in the Black Police Association. So we created a youth and education arm and working with our sister organisations in the United States, in South Africa and in the Caribbean, particularly Jamaica. And what we were looking to do was to say to young people, you are the change, and trying to empower them, well really them empower themselves. And one of the things that we were able to do was to introduce them to leadership. And those that showed the best potential, we sent them to the United States, we sent them to South Africa to work with leaders there. And they came back. And many of these young people were young people who were going to be excluded. And in the end, they went off going to some of the best universities in this country. So when we talk about alliances, for me, I think that we have to bring together the criminal justice system. I think we have to bring together education. But more importantly, I think that our community has to have a voice to say no in terms of the violence that we're seeing in our local community. So when Professor Gosjon talks about this silence, this is to our own detriment. And that's one of the things that we have to tackle. And my last point that I'm going to make is, we all pay taxes, and it was interesting when you spoke about the 2.5 billion for the Community Cohesion Fund. Well, the Metropolitan Police alone is it used to be £3 billion a year, now it's £2.5 billion. I think it's about 150,000 billion in terms of policing in this country. I'm not sure the exact amount, but certainly in London, it's 2.5 billion. We pay taxes. We should be demanding that the police do something about the deaths in our community. And I don't mean stop and search and having Section 6s where we take whole swathes of our young people off the street. It's about prevention. But I'll come back to that as we start to develop the discussion.
Oh, thank you. Hartley?
I think most of what people have said, it's interlinked. Right across this country, we've got local authorities that, Manchester for example, I think they give out in terms of contracts 400 million, just Manchester alone, 400 million plus in terms of procurement contracts, and it's rising. And you've got, surrounded by Manchester, as an example, you've got lots of organisations, lots of businesses. They're coming from as far as Preston, Bolton, getting businesses and getting procurement opportunities. And on their doorstep, we've got massive unemployment, where our small businesses and our people cannot seem to access that procurement procedure. And I think that's happening right across the country. And that cannot be right. And I think that, interlinked with all that's been said, that is an area which we need to address. Because Manchester City Council, like any other local authority, is using our money, our rates. We're not begging them a favour. They're not doing us a favour. We have a right to actually access that. And that's something that hopefully, when we have these debates, we're going to look at strategies that will begin to address some of those things.
We have about 3 people who have had to leave, so I'll just give a brief synopsis as to what they were going to be talking about. We have health. Faye Bruce was going to be talking about health. And I don't know if many of you have heard about CARN, Caribbean and African Health Network. But their remit is to look at some of the health disparities. I went to one of the seminars that they do, and it was about prostate cancer, and I learned that black men have a lot worse outcomes for prostate cancer than do white men who are being treated in the same health service. Why this is? Well, nobody's doing any research. but we pay our taxes too. And so the discussion came, what if there was a tweak in the law that put a duty on the health service to address these issues? Would that help? And the point came back, yes it would. And there are other areas in the health system where if some of the practices were changed or there was more education, we'd be taking less drugs and dealing with it in a more holistic way. Hartley.
So I just wanted to say, Manchester, for example, have massive amount of documentation, like this which talks about working with us, market position statement.
Yes.
I don't think these documents that I've looked at are actually geared towards helping us.
No.
There are massive, massive amounts of things which people of colour, black people, do not figure in any of this. And I think if we went down this road, we probably would not get any. There's a need for us to look at this and look at how it's actually working against us. But if we plough into this sort of thing, despite what I've just said, I think we will fail.
Yeah.
It is not geared for us at all.
Yeah. So it's how we get ourselves at the table and how we organise. Then there is also...
Can I just touch on this about Khan you mentioned before?
Yes.
Just for information, I know that Faye have to leave. Khan is also positioned regarding the commissioning of contracts
Yes.
around issue affecting health around black people. They have sickle cell, thalassemia, they have prostate as well as mental health.
Yes.
And that's their position to deal with the future contracts around actually make sure there's adequate provision across Manchester.
And that's an example for what we could do in education. One of the people who had to leave as well was Marcia Hutchinson. She's had a long history in working in schools and developing materials for schools. One of the things she came out with was that when she encountered teachers, the low aspirations they have for some of the children, from some of the black children, means that the children are not getting anywhere before they've even started. I looked at the government's disparity audit, and when children start school at age 4 or 5, they have to reach a certain attainment level. And about 65% of all children, white, British, African, Caribbean, Asians, Chinese, they're all reaching the attainment levels. By the time you get to A levels, only 3% of African Caribbeans are getting 3 A levels. And we know what that means. You can't go on to university and further study. 24% of Chinese are getting 3 or more A levels. 17% of Indians are getting 3 or more A levels. 11% white British are getting 3 or more A levels. Why are we only at 3% when we all started off level pegging? What happened through the system? Was it the teachers? Was it the parents? Was it the pupil referral units? We as a community need to look at what we can do to stop that Holocaust. And we need to also look at what the government needs to change, and that can only happen through legislation in order to make the outcomes better for our children. And also, we're going to have a talk about a workshop on compensation and looking at how we would see full compensation, because the government is consulting through Martin Ford QC about how the compensation for the Windrush scandal should be designed. What can we claim for? How long back can we go? Who should be able to claim? And but the view is that to get full compensation, there needs to be some kind of community fund, because the impact that the damage has is not just on the individual that has suffered it. Their family suffer it, the community suffer it. We've had reports of people being stopped from coming back to the UK. Family has had to go out there to help them, spent 10 years supporting them, then they've died, they can't claim. So how does this compensation scheme, how can it be structured so that it can benefit not only individuals but the community as a whole who have been suffering on that? There's also building strategic partnerships. There's a lot of organisations, government bodies that will want to work with us. This week I did a talk at the probation service, and through my studies I got to learn about what they do in terms of their pre-sentencing reports and how they look at all the various mitigation circumstances to decide whether somebody recommend to the courts whether somebody gets a community order or goes to prison. And a lot of the mitigating circumstances, like for example, if you can get an employer to come along and say, you know, you've got a job and you are going to start this job, it's liable that you won't get sent to prison. But a lot of black kids are not in that situation. So although they've committed the same crime, because they haven't got the mitigating circumstance, they end up in prison. And just through that conversation, we discussed whether there were schemes that could be established within the community that could act as a mitigating circumstance, so that the probation service could include it in their pre-sentencing report. And they said there's an idea there, and they're meeting with us now to have that discussion to see how that can develop further. So I'm not saying that a Windrush Act would be, you know, overly dramatic wholesale changes, but you know that, you know, all these little drops of water, they often form a torrent that can bring about change. So now I'm throwing it open to the floor to ask questions. Diane?
I just wanted to find out from George about strategies for reaching young people. Because as you say, you're not present on the social media as we've assumed. So yeah.
So I would say the best way is to go to the university, because that is where educated black young people are. So I went to Goldsmiths University, and it's an extremely liberal, very kind of, it's very, very progressive. So there's multiple groups there where people are actualising themselves and ready to kind of take this message forward. Another one is SOAS. SOAS is the Oriental and African Studies, and again, that is similar on another level. So, and I think there's a lot of the time when we try to approach the youth, we try to